Okay, so both of you now probably know that I'm Imelda Williams. I know Shankari knows us because she's a previous student that completed one of our units. So Emma, welcome um, to your first session. Yeah, so Tony is the other academic. He's a sessional that also teaches into the unit, and I'm really grateful for his support that he gives. And I'm the unit convener, and I'm also the chief examiner for the unit. So I'm just going to minimize all of that. So before we start, I would just want to acknowledge that Monash University recognizes that its Australian campuses are located on the unceded lands of the people of the Kulin Nations and pays its respects to their elders past and present. So the best way to contact either myself or Tony is via our email addresses. Tony is a sessional, so he's not available during normal hours, all of the hours. And I also teach in other units and I'm not always available. So that's the best way if you want a quick response from us as well. I've just put this in case someone just opened up the PowerPoint without looking at the Zoom details. So I'm going to stop here and then just go, and I think it's going to be more for Emma's sake, just to go through the Moodle site. So I'm just going to share that now. Okay, so Emma, I'm sure you must have during the last week with the orientation probably gone through some of this, but it's always just useful to talk the students through the Moodle site just to let them be aware of what is available. So you would notice here that if you go to the learning section, that the only things that you could see last week was getting started, and then on Friday this week also appeared. We only release the materials on a week-by-week basis, and that is to scaffold your learning. Otherwise, students become totally overwhelmed if we release everything at once. And we also try to release it on a Friday prior to the Monday when the week actually starts, because we know that some students prefer to start their reading and stuff during the weekend as well. So in terms of the unit information, you must have had a look there. There's a number of resources, and the one, of course, is the timetable. And I would encourage you to look at some of the key dates. And the key dates are when we have got like catch-up sessions, which is quite valuable, but also the dates for assessments as well. If anything happens and anything in the timetable changes, I normally then change the date when it was updated, but I will also post a notice that something has been changed in the timetable. So there's a link to the library reading list, and I'm not going to click on it, otherwise it takes me totally out here. But if you click on that link, it will take you to the books that's applicable to this unit. And these are all ebooks which you can view from wherever you are. So it's not really necessary to buy the books. And what we normally do in our weekly material, we would identify in the books that we use which pages in that books would be applicable for that week. There's also an assessment summary there for you so that you have all of your assessments for this unit as well. And then the other resource is this image interpretation book. And similar to the ebooks, when we use the image interpretation workbook, we will highlight which pages is applicable, but you can actually download that whole image interpretation workbook and save it somewhere on your folder if you want to. So those are the main things that's on the unit information. I've showed the learning. The other tab is the assessment tab. That's important. So in the assessment tab, you can see there's 3 assessments in total that contributes to this unit. And the first one has got 2 reports that needs to be submitted. It's called an ISAP case, and we'll talk a little bit more about the ISAP case, especially when we release that in next week. So there will be a video recording for that as well. And then you have got an exam and also a clinical imaging portfolio, which the material is available for this week. The other important thing is that we have got forums. The one is where myself and Tony, where we post notices for the students. But then there's also another forum where you can also contribute to the discussions. And we would really encourage you to use those forums because sometimes you might have a query and it might be the same thing that other students also have. And when we answer it, the other students can see that as well. What I would like to say though, with the forums, because we're so busy with other units, if you have posted a question on the forum, please email me. It might feel like double work for you, but just email and say you've posted a question so that I'm aware, or that Tony's also aware that there is a question in the forum. Then the support tab is quite important. There's a lot of resources that's available from the university. And then there's also the library. But the one that I just wanted to show you is the one that says supporting students. So there's Monash Connect. Sometimes if you've got an issue, enrollment issue, or anything like that, that is a central hub for questions. And then also the other one is where did that disappear? I'm just not seeing it. Sorry, I'm just looking for, sorry, I went past it, is for these extensions. So there's two types of extensions that you can apply for. Normally when you start a study, you think everything will go hunky-dory, but it's not always the case. Sometimes something happens at the time when you either need to submit something or write an exam. The university allows what they call a short extension. And what that means is that you can submit a short extension. You can get 2 days extension without having to provide supporting documentations like a letter from the doctor or something like that. But what it means is, for example, it's a 48-hour extension. So if your assignment is due Friday evening, the deadline will actually then be Sunday evening. So be aware weekends are also included in that. And then if you need more time than 2 days, there is the formal process that you can apply for, which is called the special consideration. And for that, you need to provide supporting documentations to get longer extensions. So those are the key things that I wanted to show you. Just want to ask, is there any questions around that? I see Helena's joined us. Hi, Helena.
Hi, sorry for jumping in late. I just got home from work and had to shower and everything. So, yeah, hi.
Oh, no, welcome. Before we go on, maybe just tell us quickly a little bit about yourself, where you are. Are you a radiographer?
Yes, I'm a radiographer. I'm based in Sydney and I work in a Sydney hospital. I graduated probably a few years ago now, actually from Newcastle Uni. And Tony, I still remember you actually taught me for a couple of classes in year two. So this is quite a full circle moment.
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, that's lovely. So, Helena, I'm not sure if where you came in, because my school, did you see what I showed on the Moodle site? Could you see everything there?
Yeah. I do have a question though. Will these tutorials be recorded, and if they are, where will they be uploaded for future reference?
So when this session is being recorded at the moment,
Okay.
and I normally post it under the week where we have it, and then I put it under real time, because real time is the face-to-face stuff. And I will normally send a notification to say that the recording is available and where you can find it as well. So it will be under this week real time.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
So
All right.
if you missed anything, you'll be able to at least listen to that first part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I see
Thank you.
Patrick has also joined us. He was with us last night. So welcome back, Patrick.
Hello, thank you.
So you haven't
Okay.
missed much. I've just done the first bit where I've showed them the Moodle site. So we've basically just started with that. So Patrick is also a radiographer. So you are all radiographers that we have. But we also have other professions as well that enroll in our units. So students undertaking master's degree in the faculty, they can take an elective, and quite often we have those students undertaking electives as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and just continue with where I stopped with the introduction session. Okay, so I've also posted in this presentation just the course, the whole course that we're doing, that this unit sits under, so that you can see the learning objectives for the course itself. The course, of course, is M4 0 to 0, which is the Graduate Certificate of X-ray Image Interpretation. And then the next one is actually this unit's learning outcomes. So this unit will be specific in terms of the body regions that we're going to cover. So for this unit, we cover the cervical spine, the shoulder girdle, and the upper limb. So those are the only body regions that we will be covering. And in this unit, it will be not just normal, but now we start looking at abnormal radiographic appearances and things like clinical decision rules, and also how to minimize errors as well. So I've given you a link here that will take you to the university handbook for this unit. And of course, when you open that up, you will see it's not just about the learning outcomes. It will also have the assessments that needs to be undertaken as well. Now, the resources all sit on the Moodle site. And as I've already mentioned, we release the material on a week-by-week basis. So we try our best to get it on a Friday. It's very seldom that we don't release it on a Friday unless we are just extremely busy. But we normally, if it's not Friday, it will be Saturday, but 99.9% is on a Friday. I've already mentioned the image interpretation workbook. And most of the material are presented within a Moodle book. And in that Moodle book, you will have resources there. So every week when we set up a Moodle book, we actually have identified learning outcomes for that week that needs to be achieved. There are resources supporting that Moodle book, and that resource will include PowerPoint presentations or video recorded presentations as well. It will have the links to ebooks, and sometimes there might be also some practice cases as well. And I've already shown you how to get to the reading list. Now, other ways we support the unit is we have, apart from tonight, we will have 2 further tutorials in the evening, and I would really encourage you to diarize those dates. So the first one will be on the 17th of September, and the next one will be on the 21st of October. That second one takes place in the last, the university is a 12-week academic week. It's the last week just before you actually write your exam. So that's a very useful one to attend. And the other one on the 17th of September will just be shortly after you've submitted your ISAP case and before you're going to do, in fact, there's a formative test that will be released during that week as well. So we released 2 formative tests. So one is in that week 17th, and the next one also takes place in the last week of teaching. With the formative tests, normally that will include imaging cases, so scenarios, and I provide video recorded feedback for all of those formative tests. I would really encourage you to undertake those tests. And if you have any queries about any of the cases or any questions, you can always feel free to contact us as well. I've provided some image manipulation software, how you can check. There's a video for that, but I'm quite sure all of you are more or less used to using image manipulation within the work itself. We use the image manipulation software in the ISAP cases. I use it during the formative exams and also during the summative exams. So the image manipulation software includes all of the images that's used in those exams, which means you can, during your exam, you can also go in and manipulate, zoom in, measure stuff and so forth. For the exam, the final exam, there will be specific login details. So you will require a username and a password to access the image manipulation software. So Tony, this is your chance to speak about these resources.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Imelda. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Collective Minds Radiology, but also mention some other resources, online resources that are useful to you. First of all, Collective Minds Radiology is a website that you may not be aware of, but it's been put together by radiographers and radiologists and some other specialist medical people as well, for getting help in image interpretation, if you like, where people can actually post some of their own cases and ask for your opinion. And you, if you're actually a user of Collective Minds Radiology, you can go on there and you can actually throw your hat into the ring, be a bit brave, and give your opinion as to what's going on. Now, I must say, radiology being what it is these days, you'll find that there's a lot of MRI on Collective Minds Radiology these days, but there is also plain radiographic imaging. And you really, when you actually get into the menus, you can actually choose general radiography, I think is the heading, and you can go and search through those cases. And obviously for this particular unit, you'd be interested in cases that were dealing with upper limb, shoulder, and cervical spine. Although I must say, and I'll sort of throw this into the mix at the moment, that there's not a lot of cervical spine cases, because we don't tend to do very much general radiography in cervical spine cases these days, even though cervical spine is actually part of the learning objectives in this particular unit. It's not that we're sort of oblivious to the fact that plain radiography of the cervical spine is a pretty rare beast these days, but you'll find that there is actually a little bit of crossover into CT of the cervical spine in some of the learning material, and also in the ISAP case that you'll come across. So what you can do with Collective Minds Radiology is you can sign up. There's a sign-up form online, and there's a link there for you. And it's free. There's no charge. So you can actually sign up and you can become a user. There is actually a grad cert X-ray image interpretation portal, I guess, for in Collective Minds Radiology, but it doesn't actually have anything in it at the moment, because we were hoping that some of the students might actually post cases. But nevertheless, it's there. It's there if you do have some rare cases that you want to throw up. Not necessarily rare. I mean, some of them are common cases as well, but cases that you want to throw up and actually get the opinion of others, including reporting radiographers all over the world. It's international. So a lot of UK radiographers are using it. and also radiologists as well, a lot of radiologists from different countries. So Collective Minds, look, I'm not going to talk any more about it now. I will actually post a little blurb about Collective Minds Radiology, and in time I will steer you towards some cases if they seem appropriate to our needs. There's a whole bunch of other resources out there, yeah, online, as probably you know, and I have some favorites. Radiopedia is probably one that you might already be familiar with, but Radiopedia is a very good site, again put together by a combination of radiologists and radiographers. And the other one that's just mentioned up there is a website that was put together by Ian Cowan, who's a New Zealand radiologist. And I did some work with Ian in the past, the Pacific Island countries, but also Ian did some work in Africa and also in Southeast Asia as well on teaching radiographers how to interpret plain radiographs. So that particular site, Ian Cowan's X-rays, IC X-rays, is actually directed at radiographers to actually encourage them to do frontline image interpretation. And Ian's an advocate of that, even though he's a radiologist. That's in some ways still a rare thing. Look, I'd encourage you to have a look at lots of different sites. Those that I've just mentioned are only a handful of, or only a few of many. And there's some very useful resources out there which you can use to supplement your learning. And you can even refer to them in your assignment work, in your ISAP reports, so long as you reference them correctly and make sure they're up-to-date sites and what have you. And I'm sure you understand the referencing for online materials. So if not, have a look online. But yeah, there's a whole lot of resources out there. We'd love to hear from you as well if you've actually found a resource that maybe we don't know about, because it's not always possible to sort of keep abreast of all of the online resources that are available out there. So if you come across something that's particularly useful, you come across some cases on websites that maybe highlight something that you're learning, or maybe that you think others can benefit from as well, then you can make sure, perhaps by using the forum, that we're all aware of that particular resource. And that's well appreciated if you want to do that. It's there's certainly no harm in doing that, and it's beneficial not only to yourself but to all of us, and certainly we're a team. So that's all I'm going to say for the moment, Imelda.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Okay, so the next slide has got all of your assessments and also the weighting for each of the assessments. So the first assessment that you're going to do is the ISAP case. And that has got 2 reports. So ISAP stands for Integrating Science and Practice. The first report is the Clinical Action Plan, which is the biggest part of this assessment. And that will be due on the 29th of August. And then the second part, normally a week later, is a comparative report. But we will talk a bit more about that. And the value for that is 30%. The online exam takes place in the exam period, and it will take place on the 3rd of November. Now, the exam falls within the first week of the university exam period at the end of the semester. So it will actually cover all of the work that we've done. So there's a lot that will be covered in that exam. And that's why we have got these formative tests, sort of breaking the work up in two, so that you have a formative test halfway through, so that we provide questions that would sort of mirror what you can expect, and then another formative test as well. So there's quite a lot that will be covered in that exam. And then you will have a clinical portfolio, which I think for all of you, for those like Shangari, you've only done the one unit and there wasn't a clinical portfolio. So I think the clinical portfolio is new to everybody as well. And I have got a presentation around the clinical portfolio, which I will also go through tonight as well. So the deadline for that is in the last week of the exam period, which is on the 17th of November. And all of the resources to support you will be during this week, because everything about the clinical portfolio is uploaded during this week. You will also notice that the online exam and the clinical portfolio have got competency hurdles attached to it. That means that you have to pass those assessments and at a minimum of 50%. So if you don't pass it at first instance, you get a second opportunity to undertake, say, for example, the exam again, but then that will be capped at 50%. The ISAP case doesn't have a hurdle attached, but the weighting is also quite significant. So 30% of the unit's weighting is quite a significant portion of that. So don't think, oh, well, the ISAP case doesn't have a competency hurdle, I don't have to worry too much about it, because at the end, it contributes to your final mark for the assessment. And then regarding academic integrity, now some of you who's completely new might receive an email to tell you about a compulsory module that you need to do under academic integrity. And if you do receive that email, please ensure that you complete that compulsory module. It doesn't take very long. But there comes a time when the university will send an email to say, if you don't complete it by a certain date, you will lose your access to the Moodle site. And that will really happen if you don't do it. So when you receive that email, I'm not sure if you already received it, please ensure that you do complete the academic integrity model, because the university takes academic integrity very seriously. And then a lot has been talked now about AI, and some of you might have experienced already some of the changes or the impact with AI within your clinical practice. I think some of our equipment nowadays has got AI. I know with CT, there's almost automated positioning of patients happening. And I'm also aware that some sites, clinical sites, uses AI to produce a preliminary image evaluation report, which the radiologists view, but the radiologist is still the one that needs to sign off on it. So there are instances where AI is being used. However, for the university, they support responsible and ethical use of AI. And under the support tab that I showed you, there's a link to Learn HQ where you can learn more about AI. I've mentioned special consideration, so I'm not going to spend more time on that. Okay, so just a bit more about the ISAP case. So the first part is a clinical action plan. So normally what you get with the ISAP case is presented in a Moodle book. You will get a clinical scenario. There will be images, also with image manipulation software. And then there's a listed professional issues that you need to address, and that you submit as the clinical action plan. Now, the overall word count for the ISAP case is 2,000, but the clinical action plan takes a majority of that. It's 1,500 words. And then the second part is a comparative report. Now, once you have submitted your clinical action plan, you will then receive an expert report. That expert report gets released. So most of the time, say it's on a Friday evening at 5 to 12, it's a deadline for the clinical action plan. So at 12 o'clock, basically the next Saturday morning, 0 hours, the expert report becomes available. But it also only will become available if you have submitted your clinical action plan. You then use that expert report to compare and contrast your clinical action plan. So you need to look at similarities and differences, and then you write up a comparative report, which is 500 words, and you can write that up as bullet points as well. And there is a rubric that will assist you in how to, what we're looking for as well. And as I mentioned, next week, we will release more on the ISAP case. Now, do remember the university, because you postgrad students only allow you one submission. So when you submit your work, it has to be the final report, because the report is put into a matching software, which is called Turnitin. And that actually checks if there's any plagiarism there. So with Turnitin, there's a cap on the similarity. So there's normal similarity that's allowed up to 15%. But if it's greater than that, I normally say to students, don't run into a big panic situation, because quite often it could be that the students have copied the professional issues and put it into their report, and all of that is then matched. So when we mark, we go in and check the reports ourselves to see if there's any evidence of plagiarism. So all of the assessments are submitted via the assessment taskbar that I've showed you. And I've also mentioned the other things about the expert report and the comparative report as well. So the ISAP case, as mentioned, will be next week. And these are the submission dates for the ISAP case. So the online exam has got the biggest weighting. It's got a 40% weighting. So it will be basically all of the resources that we've worked through, all of the Moodle books that we've worked through over the period. And these are the weeks that it will cover. You will see that week 5 is missing if you look at all the consecutive weeks. The reason why week 5 is missing, that's when you have to submit your CAP report, which is the biggest part of your assessment. So we don't include any other material during that week. However, with the CR report only being 500 words, then we start including new material again. I've already talked about the 2 formative tests. So there's one in week 8 and one in week 12. And I also provide video recorded feedback on all of those formative tests. So these are all computer-based exams. During the exam, you will have access to the image manipulation software on the Moodle site, and that is the date for the exam. And because it's such a big exam, I would really encourage you to take the day off in advance. Make sure that you're off on that day, because it is quite an intensive exam to write. It's 100 minutes long. You can undertake the exam anytime between 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there's a 12-hour window period to undertake the exam. But once you start the exam, you've got to complete the exam. You should also be very conscious that at 8 p.m. the exam will shut down, irrespective if you have completed it. So if you work, please don't rush back and start the exam, say at 6:30 or 7 o'clock or something like that, because you won't have enough time. So in terms of how we monitor the exam, before you can actually access the exam, there's an academic integrity statement that you sign that you will not plagiarize any of the material. And then you can't use AI in this assessment. And it's because you need to demonstrate your knowledge, your human knowledge and skills that you've learned. I've also put there that you need to let me know what is your suggested start time. And the reason for that is because the exam is open until 8 p.m. in the evening. There's no technical support after 5. So I'm the only person that's available. So they're not going to support the whole exam. So I normally need to know more or less when you will be starting the exam, so that I can ensure that I'm at the computer should you have any issues. And also, I also email your login details prior to your start time as well. So please look out for when I start sending out that email for you to let me know your start time. And then both the Moodle exam and the image manipulation software is password protected. So the clinical portfolio is the third assessment that you need to do, and that's due on the Monday in the last week of the formal exam period. It has a weighting of 30%. What you need to do with the clinical portfolio is during the semester, you need to collect a minimum of 25 clinical cases related to this unit. So it's cases of the cervical, spine, shoulder, and upper limb. And then write these up. So you basically write up your own preliminary image evaluation. Now, the overall word count for the clinical portfolio is 2,000. So on average, it's around about 80 words per case. But again, don't stress too much about that because some cases will be less than 80 and some will be more. And then each of the cases is marked out of 4. And the other important thing to remember is you must also include normal cases. Don't just look for abnormal cases. And then with your clinical portfolio, there's 2 parts to it. So the one is where you submit your 25 cases, and the second part is a self-auditing preliminary image evaluation, where you actually then calculate your sensitivity, which is how good you pick up abnormalities. Your specificity is how good you are in identifying what is normal, and your overall accuracy rate. And then on that same form, you then need to reflect on your abilities that you've learned through this portfolio. So you can reflect on areas where you really feel you've gained a lot of knowledge, that you feel very confident, but you can then also mention areas where you still feel that you need to really keep on working. What's important is that in your 25 cases, identify each case numerically in chronological order, because it makes me much more easier to go through your cases. And then once you've written up your preliminary image evaluation, you then need to compare that to the radiologist, and it is related to the clinical question. And at the end of each case, you need to then assign, is this a true negative case, or is it a true positive case, or is there a false negative or false positive? But I'll talk a little bit more in the clinical portfolio about that. So the PIE, then the important thing is to look at the clinical questions. So if it's a trauma case, and when you compare to the radiologist's reports, quite often radiologists would include some chronic findings. So say, for example, if it's a cervical spine, they might say there's some arthritic changes. That is not a clinical question. So you can ignore that part and just focus on comparing your report to the findings that's related to the trauma. However, there might be some incidental findings that's not related to trauma, but it's still important to mention. So be aware of that as well. I think I've mentioned all of these, and I will talk more about that if I go through the clinical case. I've also just given an example of how you can write up each of the cases. So remember at the top, the number case that you're talking about, which body region. And I would also just encourage you. So say, for example, if you have got a patient for a forearm, but there's forearm and wrist, for example, write it as 2 separate cases, because normally it's quite difficult then to assign, your findings as well. So I would encourage you, even though it's the same patient, you can write it up as 2 separate cases. Include the clinical indications. You must include at least 1 image, and it must be de-identified for each case. So in this case, the PIE was that there's a comminuted fracture to the distal radius with dorsal displacement and an associated ulnar styloid process fracture. But when compared to the radiologist, so most of it matched with the radiologists, both identify the fractures. But the one thing that the PIE did not mention was that it was intra-articular. So the true positive, so there was a matching with the pathology, was 0.75, and false negative, that is for missing intra-articular, which is really a very important finding as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop share here and then just ask if there's any questions around what I've talked now. before I go on to just going over the clinical case.
I just had a couple of questions relating to the exam structure. Multiple choice and short answer predominantly, or would there be long answer involved with that?
Yeah, there's a mixture of questions. So some will include multiple choice, there could be matching questions, but then there's also just image-based where you get an image and then you have to write almost essay style text-based answers as well. So it's really a mix, because the main thing is that you need to articulate what you see on the images. And so it's not just like MCQs the whole time. So we want you to express what you are going to see. But when we set the exam up, we will indicate, how the marks are assigned and also which ones require you to write freestyle text as well. Anything else about the exam? Emma, you've got any questions? You okay there? And Helena? Good. Shangari, with you?
Hi, I have a question. You did mention that we should include like normal images as well for the evaluation. For example, can we like divide it into half, perhaps 10 normal and 15 abnormal? Would that be reasonable, or would you prefer more abnormal cases?
Yeah, normally there's more cases with pathology. But what I would like to say is don't just have like 3 normal cases. So, even if you have 8 to 10, and the reason for that is you need to work out your specificity. So specificity indicates how well you are in discriminating that there's no pathology. And sometimes it's most difficult to decide that the case is normal, because you actually expect every case there must be something wrong. So students tend to overcall on that. So it's really important that you don't have too limited numbers of your normal cases. But as I said, normally there's the higher weighting towards pathology. Tony, I don't know if you want to say anything there.
No, I thoroughly agree with you, Imelda, and I think the trick is, I've suggested this in the past to students as well, as like try not to cherry pick your cases, but think of some way that you can sort of almost randomize the cases that you're actually going to include in your clinical imaging portfolio, because for example, what you might do is actually choose a particular time period where you might choose all of the relevant cases in that particular time period and look at those rather than sort of just cherry picking cases. The other thing and by cherry picking, I mean that you just choose those cases that have got some pathology, and particularly cases that have got obvious pathology that you're going to get right. You need to actually challenge yourself. Another thing that some students who've not had good access to cases have used archived cases, so cases off the packs, and choose a particular period again of time, and then access those cases that are relevant. So the upper limb, shoulder, cervical spine cases. And you might find, particularly with cervical spine, you don't come across too many acute cervical spine plain X-ray examinations on a day-to-day basis, but there will be archived cases somewhere. And if you can access those and make use of those, then that's fine to do that. The important thing is to choose a range of cases of different examination types, but also to choose cases that are not all just demonstrating an abnormality. That some of those cases, as in a day's work, some of those cases are going to be normals. And as Imelda said, sometimes, saying to the emergency physician or the junior medical officer or whoever it might be. No, that's a normal, that's a normal appearance is sometimes the hard part. There's a tendency for us all to want to see pathology, and you can read about it in the literature as well. Look at some of the research studies that are done, and there's a tendency to overcall normals abnormal. So I think just be alert to that. It's one of the many challenges of actually interpreting radiographs. Yeah. I'll leave it there, Imelda.
Thanks, Tony. I just also want to mention, you don't need to just include cases that you've x-rayed. Okay, so some students thought that they can only include stuff that they've x-rayed the patients themselves. So as mentioned, you can use archive cases or cases that if you are working and you see a case that you want to include and you've not x-rayed the patient, you can do that. So you don't have to be the radiographers actually x-rayed that patient. Patrick, have you got your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask one more question to build on Shangari's question actually as well. Based on that sort of premise as well, would we in a way also be encouraged to use examinations and cases that are suboptimal in nature? So just as a throwaway example, patient who clearly has a wrist fracture, but as a result of mobility, what have you, is unable to actually get into a lateral position in the conventional sense, having to have done the X-ray Hori beam, hypothetically, or so just untraditional sort of imaging standpoints and working around, especially in the trauma setting, would be encouraged to do something like that as well.
Yes, because that's where you actually learn the most.
Okay.
Trying to interpret the stuff that's not your normal book kind of appearances as well. So that's stuff that we would certainly want to encourage. Okay, so I'm just quickly going to share. I did post a video on the clinical portfolio, but I'm just quickly going to run through it in case you have got any questions about that. I'm just going to skip some of the intro stuff. Let me think I'm going to start there. Okay, so under this week, you probably would have noticed that I've posted a PowerPoint about this, but then also a video recording. And because you only submit your clinical portfolio almost right at the end, I would encourage you to go back to this, if you start preparing your cases, just to refresh your mind about what is expected as well. And then I've already mentioned the clinical portfolio, that you must include a minimum of 25 clinical cases. You can add more, but 25 is the minimum that you need to include. Please don't go to 50. I've had a student that included so many, it seems like every patient she x-rayed was included. It took me extremely long to mark that clinical portfolio. But anyway, yeah, so the minimum is 25. You can add more than that. And then you've got your PIE auditing record that you need to do. So for the clinical cases then, that's marked out of 100. So each case is basically worth 4 marks. And I've already mentioned how to write it up. And these are the body regions. Now, it's not required that you should have references, but sometimes if you've got an interesting case and you want to have supporting evidence for that, you can include a reference as well, if you want to support your discussion. And we've already talked about that you cannot use AI. So you need to include either, the clinical indications, mechanism of injury, for example, and then de-identified images, a minimum of 1. You can add more than that, of course, and then write your preliminary image evaluation without looking at the radiologist report. That's the way that you actually learn. So don't cheat and try and see what the radiologist said and then write yours up to sort of match the radiologist's report, and then go and compare your PIE to that of the radiologist. Again, not really necessary, but sometimes students feel they want to also include what happened to the patient immediately. So the immediate management of the patient. So that's quite useful if you want to include that as well. It just made me think of one of the students who completed actually this unit a while ago, and she had a pediatric patient that came in, I think she was working in the ski field somewhere here in Victoria, and the patient came in after hours. And of course, the radiologist wasn't there, and she identified that there was a dislocated radial head. She went to the referring doctor. She knew that he was a bit of a junior doctor, and asked, showed the images and asked, what does he think? And he said it's normal. And she actually said, no, it's not normal, because, if you draw these certain lines, you can actually see that the radial head is dislocated. So he was really appreciative of that, because he was going to send the patient home. So the patient went to theatre and was fixed up. But then the next morning, when the radiologist reported on the case, she also saw that the radiologist said it's normal. And she went to the radiologist and also said what had happened. And she actually showed him that there's a dislocated radial head. And he really appreciated that much that he added an appendix to change his report, and mentioned her in the report, thanking her because he could have sent through an incorrect report. So sometimes it might be useful to read about those immediate patient managements that happens.
Imelda, just
Yeah.
that just raises the important issue about what if the radiologist report's wrong and you're right.
Yeah.
And how you actually handle that when you're doing your audit and reporting things like sensitivity and specificity. Whereas, to some extent, we assume that the radiologist report is correct and that that's the gold standard. But in reality, as I'm sure you already know, sometimes radiologists get it wrong as well. And look, we don't want you necessarily just to throw those cases out. They're really interesting cases, but just how you handle it in terms of calculating the sensitivity and specificity, true negatives and false positives and that sort of thing, that actually adds a degree of complexity, I guess, that you have to do battle with.
I just want to say, if you are unsure, in a case like that where there was clearly a pathology, the radiologist said initially it was a normal case. And in fact, if it's proven to be pathology, then it's a true positive. So that's how you need to see it. So even with the images, so normally if the radiologist report is different, but you don't comment on the radiologist report, because normally we would expect you to discuss it with the radiologist or the referring physician. But it could also be that it's one of the historic cases that you're getting from archive. And when you look at it, look at it, and if you can say, this is my PIE, this is why this differs from the radiologist report, I really look at those kind of things and how you then assign your your true positive and true negative and so forth. But if there's any cases that you are unsure of, please email us or email me before the time, and I can have a look at it and assist you in how to assign your auditing record. Now, this is the marking rubric for the clinical cases. So as you can see, it's out of 4 marks, and basically the symptoms that we're looking at. And then you can use the ABC systematic strategy that we are using in this course. However, you don't have to write up each of those ABCs. So say, for example, if there's no issues with alignment, you only need to focus maybe just on the bone or cartilage or soft tissue, so so that it doesn't increase your word count. So you don't have to say the alignment was normal, but there's a fracture of the bone. So you can just pick up on what is really necessary for that case as well. And this is the same example that I showed you in the other presentation. And then, so I think that I also had that in there. The other thing to please be aware of is sometimes you need to use fractions. So say, for example, when there's 2 fractures, you only identified 1. It means that you've only identified half of the pathology. So it will be a half true positive, but the other half will be a false negative. And each of those cases must only be equal to 1. So if you get your fractions add more up to 1, then something has been assigned wrong. And then you have to calculate the sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. And I've given you the formula for that. And then also write up a brief reflection, as I've already mentioned. It's on that same self-auditing PIE record. And this is just a summary of the true, negative, and so forth. So this is the spreadsheet that you need to use. So you can see at the top, we've got true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative. You will, of course, add more rows to this. But when you assign, say, for example, the C-spine, when you add this up in that row, it must only be equal to 1. And then once you've got, say, your 25 cases, so you add up all your true positive, all your true negatives, false positive, and false negative. So on this bottom line, when you add all of that up, it must be equal to 25. But say, for example, if you have 30 cases, then it should be equal to 30, that bottom row. So make sure that that is right, because some students, and especially what I did find is where students had 1 patient, but there's 2 body regions, and then they get very confused as to how they assign it. That's why I'm saying rather write it up as 2 different cases. And this is just the what we call the 2x2 decision-making table. So at the top, we've got the radiologist report of the gold standard, and it's measured against the preliminary image evaluation. So the positive stuff is true positive if everything matches the abnormality. And then there's the false positive. So if you overcall, and then true negative, and false negative is if you undercall. Now, the sensitivity, that is to do with how well you are at identifying pathologies. And you want to keep that as close as possible to 100%, because it then shows how well you are at not just identifying abnormalities, but also describing the abnormalities, because it's in your description, that's where you might have to use fractions as well. And then you want to have as little false negatives as possible. With your specificity, then again, try to get it as close as 100%. And also this picks up how well you are at discriminating cases and not overcalling on them. So these are your normal cases. So you want to have as few as possible false positives. I think the one risk, and especially if you work more in a regional or rural area where you don't always have a radiologist around you, quite often the doctors might come to you, especially if they're more junior, and ask your opinion while they're waiting for the radiologist report. So it's really important that you don't overcall on normal cases, because that can then lead to unnecessary examinations being done on patients. And the accuracy is basically the ratio of how well you are in including both, identifying both positive and negative cases. So how well you are overall in your accuracy in identifying cases. And you can see that formula there. Okay, so I'm just going to stop share here and then just ask if anyone has got any questions around the portfolio.
Hi, sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah, Shangari.
Okay, for the images, I understand that we have to put at least 1 images, but for most of the cases we have like a AP and lateral. Do you think we should put both in or?
Yeah, you can. That's why we say a minimum of one, but you
Okay.
can, most of the time there's two.
Okay.
So you can, and sometimes students add more than those two, especially if they think they are all relevant. So you can add more cases. I would just encourage you, to when you put your cases in, not to make a whole page long, because sometimes that clinical portfolio goes on for pages on pages. Yeah, so use the aspect ratio so that when you minimize it, you know that you don't distort the image. Yeah, but you can add more than one case. One image to a case.
Okay.
And I
Thank you.
also want to say, if you do struggle with certain body regions to find cases, please let us know, because having especially professions that's not radiography, we do find that some of them just work in finite areas and they might struggle to find some of the cases as well. So as like Tony already mentioned, cervical spine might be quite limited. So if you really struggle, do let us know. We need to know beforehand that you are having an issue trying to find those cases. And it's not just about trauma. So some of your cases, you might even work in areas where you get more chronic cases than more trauma. You can have less trauma than more chronic cases. So please feel free to contact us if you are unsure about anything regarding the clinical portfolio. Any questions from the other students? Because I think this will be quite new for you guys.
Helena, how does Sydney Hospital compare for trauma? Do you get a lot of trauma cases at Sydney Hospital? Or?
Yeah, so we specialize in hands and eyes. So we get a lot of hand traumas that come in and upper limbs. Eyes, well, we don't really do many cranium x-rays. They go straight to CT anyway. So yeah, it's mainly upper limbs. We do get some lower limbs, but our hospital doesn't have the right orthopods for us to process those patients. So if we do get those traumas in, then we end up just transferring them to a much larger hospital in Sydney. So yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah. So if you do have limitations like that, then I think the important thing and probably the bottom line is ask. If you're unsure or you're concerned, then raise the issue early.
Of course.
With Imelda.
I don't make all the Tony makes it. I don't make all the decisions by myself. We work quite closely together. I would normally consult him and maybe say, is there other resource that we can make available, because he's got lots of resources and stuff. But yeah, but if you do struggle to find certain body regions, please contact us. And you also don't have to have, say there's 25, you don't need to have 5 of each. So you might just only have 2 and maybe more of another body region, as long as you try to cover all of it. But please, if you really do struggle, to contact us.
Yep, do. Thank you.
Emma, with you okay with everything so far?
Yeah, I think at the moment I'll probably have questions later.
Okay. Yeah, but really feel free, if you now know what the unit requires. So if you start thinking I need to do this and you really struggle to be able to do that, please contact us. And then the other thing I just want to say, if you do find with assessments, and we're not just talking about clinical portfolio, maybe with the ISAP case where you find around about that time that you are struggling and something happened, that impact you so that you can't meet that deadline. I know you, when you submit a spec on, it doesn't come to us. We've got a team, they call the SEPS team, that looks at it. But let us also know, because sometimes it's held up by them, and at least I know this is why I did not submit something. So it's always useful to just send us an email and say, listen, I've applied for a short extension, is normally 2 days, so that's not a big deal, but especially if it's going to be a longer extension. We have had students who really, something dramatically happened, and we are there to support you guys. We want you to be successful, so please don't stress on your own. If there's anything that we can do to support you, just we are an email away. And then during the exam, when you write the exam, I normally give my contact, my office number is directed to my mobile. So if during an exam you have an issue and you want me to respond immediately, you can also call, because normally I have my phone and I'm at the computer so that I can respond immediately. And it's things like, say, if you're working more in a rural or remote, you might find the download speed is very slow. And we actually experienced it with one of the students, and she's really struggled. And then she went to a conference in more big city and realize how quickly things needs to download when she write the exams, and saw the difference. And she struggled with the other exams, and we just thought she was really struggling with the exams. But she didn't let us know that she struggled. It takes a while before the images download. And if she had contacted me during the exam, I could have actually extended her exam time to ensure that she could still complete the exam, even if it's longer than the 100 minutes that's required. So that's why I always say, let me know more or less when you write. If you say 10 o'clock, doesn't mean you have to start at 10. Sometimes something happens, but at least I know around about that time I can be at my computer and make sure I'm available if anything goes wrong. Okay. Tony, anything you want to add before we call it a night?
Only just to reinforce that matter of, contact us, talk to us. We're available. We're happy to hear from you. Don't ever feel that you can't ask a question. It may be that you're harboring a question that everybody else wants to ask as well. And then if it's appropriate, we will actually share the answer to your question with other members of our cohort as well, so that everybody gets the answer. But I think the important thing is communicate, ask, keep in touch with us. Best thing to do is to send us an email, and we'll get back to you as quick as possible. Actually, send the email. Address the email to both of us, and then
one of us will pick. One of us will pick it up. Yeah.
Yeah, one or other of us, if not both of us, will actually answer you. Yeah.
Okay, so if there's no more questions from everyone, I just want to thank you for attending. And then, as I mentioned, there will be 2 more catch-up sessions, tutorial sessions that will always start at 6:30, and we will always record those sessions, but we can only record if there's students, because myself and Tony, we can't talk to each other. I can't show him the PowerPoint. So yeah, so I would really encourage you to attend those sessions as well, because I know there's students that would like to attend, but they're working. So I normally get a few students saying, I can't attend. Can you please make sure that we record it? And as I mentioned, I will upload this recording to the Moodle site and under this week, under real time. Okay, then thank you, everybody. And I wish you all the best. And as we say, we're just an email away. All right. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.